Hello everybody, how are you guys doing? My name is Rob of Rule of Two Review, and welcome back. So today I want to talk about a fun little theory and rumor and thought that's been existing out there for quite a while. Ever since the Switch first launched earlier in the year, this has been a conversation. And in some of my Q&As that I've done in the past, I've received questions about it. I recently started doing the occasional live stream, finally, which is really cool, and those have been a lot of fun. And on my most recent one, I actually had some questions about this as well, but I decided not to address it in the live stream because I already knew I kind of wanted to discuss this anyway, and now feels like a good time. So, it's pretty obvious what rumor and theory and idea I'm talking about, and it is the concept of Nintendo upgrading the Nintendo Switch at some point in its life. Or, as a weird tiny little aside that I really won't put much stock into, updating the dock. I don't really think we're going to get an upgraded dock. We might get into that as the conversation kind of goes here, but ultimately, it's the Switch itself. We're looking at the Nintendo Switch. We're looking at that tablet and everything that makes the Switch what it is. Is there any reason to expect Nintendo to want to release an upgraded or an updated or a changed or an improved version of the Switch? And I would say, maybe. So I should probably be completely honest with you guys and tell you that I more than anything don't think that Nintendo will ever release an upgraded Switch. For some reason, what the Switch represents, not being a handheld, being this console that also has this unique feature of being able to take it with you on the go, I think changes the game when it comes to the concept. It's not impossible, and I'm going to get into why it's not impossible in a minute. But I think for some reason, it just doesn't feel like what Nintendo wants to be doing with their current main hardware right now. And I know that I said it's not a handheld, but it is a handheld because it is a handheld. I get that. But I mean, in the sense that it's not the handheld device that supports their handheld gaming currently on the market. The Switch is their home console and handheld portable. I mean, we keep saying the same words over and over again when describing it. It's almost impossible to classify the Switch, I guess, in that respect, you know, if we're being fair here. But the 3DS, as old as it is, and as much as a lot of you guys just want to see it go away and die, it is still a relevant piece of hardware that Nintendo produces. They're releasing new ones all the time, new 2DSs. There are games coming out for it this year and next year in 2018. Like, it's not dead yet, and that is their dedicated handheld device that exists currently. And the Switch is not that, okay? And so in that respect, it's like, it's not their dedicated handheld market. It is their home console market that also allows for the handheld thing. And because of that, I don't know, man, I just don't feel like Nintendo wants to do much to change that. And I think that even when you look at when the Switch released, relevant to its competition, to when the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One released, and the fact that we know in the next couple of years, those things are probably going to have to go as well and move on to their next things and next iterations. If we see a new Xbox and PlayStation, there are some people who think we won't. I happen to think we will, but you never really truly know. We live in weird times when it comes to this stuff anyway, to be fair. You know, when you look at how the Switch released in relative terms to those consoles, I feel like things are probably going to line up fairly nicely in the next 3, 4, 5 years when I think all console manufacturers are going to be getting ready to roll into their next thing. And I do think that the generation kind of blocks, you know, the segments that segment out when one generation starts and another one begins. I do think it's changing, and it's not as uniformed as it used to be where all three companies moved at kind of the same time. So it's not like we have to expect to see Sony, Nintendo, Microsoft all at the same time move to the next thing. But I think that everything is still close enough that we might be seeing that. And so the Switch might only have another couple of years in it before Nintendo would look at moving on to the next thing, whatever the sequel to the Switch is, their next home console, as opposed to just, you know, another version of the same thing. Hopefully that makes sense and you guys are following okay. I'm pretty sure you probably can follow that logic overall. At the end of the day, I just don't know that the Switch would have long enough of a life to warrant or give enough time for a new upgraded version of the Switch to launch. And so why would Nintendo spend the time and the money and the R&D and the marketing to even try to sell people on why this matters when there's just not going to be enough time to do it? At some point, I feel like they would probably just more than likely move on to the next thing. But as I already alluded to, I still don't think that it's impossible. There are a couple of main reasons why I could see Nintendo deciding to upgrade the Nintendo Switch in one way, whether it is the Switch itself or even the dock. I mean, well, we can sort of include the dock in this conversation. which again, I don't really think that's the case. But yeah, there are a couple of reasons why I could see it happening. And so we should never rule it out. I'm trying to be smart here and open-minded and not rule it out, because that's how you get caught with your pants down and surprised and be like, oh, I swore up and down it would never happen, and then here we go. The Nintendo Switch XL Lite DSi, whatever they're going to call it. You know, the Super Nintendo Switch. That's kind of a cool name, actually. You know, they might end up doing that at some point, and then it's like, well, I guess we were all wrong. Nintendo did decide to upgrade the Switch. So there are, like I said, a couple of reasons why I could see this making sense for Nintendo. And to me, it's all about it making sense. You know, it's less like should it happen, but does it make sense to Nintendo? And they look at things and think about things quite a bit differently. A lot of us who are Nintendo fans know. One of the first things that jumps to mind, I'm sure we'll all agree with this, is the fact that we have seen Nintendo do this traditionally before. And to be fair, with the exception of the NES, I think, it has been all handhelds. And, you know, handheld, hybrid, whatever we're going to call this, it has been handhelds. They released several updated versions of the Game Boy Advance, and the Nintendo 3DS. In fact, it's the 3DS upgrades that are probably the most relevant and pertinent to this idea of the Nintendo Switch. Not just because it's the most recent handheld with changes, but also because the changes they made to the 3DS line actually did improve the components within the console. They did improve actual features and capabilities of the console. That's what the new 3DS did, is suddenly there's new processing power, and there's the ability, there's NFC technology, so you can scan amiibos right into the 3DS as opposed to buying the little weird dongle thing that they wanted for older DS or 3DS models and stuff like that. And so we've seen that Nintendo was willing to take some hardware, traditionally mostly handhelds, and upgrade them and release newer versions, sleeker versions, more streamlined versions, add new features, add new power and processing power within the console. They've done that before, and since they've been willing to do it even as recently as a couple of years ago, why wouldn't they also consider doing it for the Switch? Another big thing to talk about and consider why Nintendo might actually be willing to upgrade the Nintendo Switch is because, as weird as it is, we live in a time where that's sort of the current market trend. Sony has done it, Microsoft has done it once, and they're about to do it a second time. Like a week from the recording of this video, the Xbox One X comes out, and it's the second upgraded version of the Xbox One. And the Xbox and PlayStation are the direct competitors to the Nintendo Switch. Handheld, hybrid or not, they are the competitors. And so Nintendo might be looking at their competitors saying, wow, gosh, guy number 1 and guy number 2 are already doing it. They're seeing okay success. You know, it is improving the gameplay experience, the graphical output, the fidelity. It is making games for some people better. It is taking advantage of, you know, 4K TV technology for those consoles. And the Xbox One X, the most powerful console ever released, all these fun things. Hey, we're seeing the benefits to them doing it. And you know what? Our Switch is great. It gets things done, but maybe we really do need a little bit more power out of it. And so when you get 2 or 3 years into the Switch's life, everything, all of the components, everything that makes up the current Switch have become much, much cheaper. Everything it would take to make an upgraded Switch with even more power in it that makes it a more capable system also has become suddenly cheaper. And you might be able to discount the current Switch to $199 in 3 years, but then you release the new upgraded Switch with the newer components for the same $299 this Switch sells for. And Nintendo's got a couple of things that they're kind of juggling there, and they're possibly making more money if they're selling more, and they're saving money on components for the older models. And maybe we get better gameplay experiences out of it. Suddenly, previous third-party titles that maybe wouldn't run on the Switch might actually suddenly become more possible because of the more power into the Switch. That is the reason a lot of people are into the idea of Nintendo eventually upgrading the console. Obviously, part of that conversation is the power I was just talking about. Suddenly, we get a Switch that is more capable, and maybe even other cool features like the ability to do like live stream gaming or something. I don't know, maybe they make a new Switch that has a camera on it that allows us to do something the current Switch doesn't. Maybe it becomes easier to get apps and you know, like video playback and things like that on the Switch just because of more power under the hood, these kinds of things. Not to mention, maybe the shape or the size or the design of the Switch also changes in a way that might be ergonomically better. Perhaps the Joy-Cons get an upgrade because of the shape or size of the new Switch console and the new Switch screen. I mean, there's myriad things that you start to think about when you consider Nintendo taking the current Switch as it exists, this crazy, weird, but super awesome and sexy thing, and they decide to change it, upgrade it, make it bigger, make it smaller, make it more ergonomic or comfortable. Maybe there's even more features they throw into the Joy-Con. I mean, who even knows? The other big question is, how does the dock fit into this whole thing? And you know, the dock represents the whole supplemental computing device that people have been talking about for like over a year. Back into the NX days, we were hearing about the supplemental computing device thing, which, unless this has been debunked somewhere that I'm not familiar with, my theory on the supplemental computing device is that the people who were kind of in the know at the time of what the Switch was, you know, maybe like the Eurogamer guys who basically outed what the Switch was months and months and months before we ever saw what it was. Maybe they also knew or learned of a component to the Switch that was this separate thing that you would plug the Switch into to display it on the TV, and that added, you know, like a small bit of fidelity. You know, you get like a slightly better frame rate and resolution sometimes. And so maybe that's somehow translated to them that it was more than what it truly is. It was something that, you know, seriously boosted the power and the capability of the Switch. And so that turned into this whole rumor of a supplemental computing device. And so by the time we saw the Switch and we saw the dock and we understood what the dock truly is, that people assumed, well, remember the supplemental computing device, that could be a different thing Nintendo's planning on doing. Or maybe they could upgrade the dock to make it that, so it can, you know, it might be 1080 on your handheld, but then it's 4K when you put it through the dock or whatever. And so are they going to upgrade the dock to be able to do these kinds of things? That's my whole little diatribe about the dock there. And, you know, I think no. I just feel like that's not the case. And this is me almost treading into territory I shouldn't touch on, because you guys know how completely inept I am when it comes to the hardware and the tech specs and how these things break down and what goes into them and what they make possible. But something tells me that what it would take for a dock for a Nintendo Switch to add so much capability to the machine is just a really difficult thing to produce, and possibly even incredibly expensive. So expensive that it might not even be something that's appealing to the average gamer and the average consumer. Just a guess and a theory there, based on my limited knowledge of the topic, but I feel like that's probably the case. Not to mention, I wonder how a dock that adds so much more power would segment the games and segment what's possible in the games and how developers would be making games. And does that mean some games wouldn't be worth playing in handheld mode because they'd be so garbage without the power of a new powered up dock? Would it mean that some games would only be able to be played in docked mode because they would require the power of the dock? I mean, I feel like the more you split the capability of the Switch itself and the dock itself, you're making too much of a gap that games are just not going to run on both options. And so that makes me think about the last thing I think that an upgraded Switch might allow would maybe be no dock. I mean, we basically know that the dock currently is mostly just a pass-through. And I remember some people were very upset that the Switch couldn't be plugged in directly to a TV without the need for the $90 dock. And maybe an upgraded Switch would have that. Maybe that would be a feature that Nintendo would build into it. Hey, the new Switch doesn't even need a dock. You can just plug it right into the TV, save the money, whatever, blah, blah, blah. It's got all the power and the upgraded resolution that the dock would provide already built into it. Something like that. And so that's kind of where this whole thing wraps itself up. I mean, you know my opinions and feelings. I don't ultimately think that Nintendo is going to do it, mostly because of the time scenario. And at some point within the next 3, 4, definitely by 5 years, the Switch is going to feel like such outdated technology. Sony and Microsoft moving on to their next things, I think within that time frame. Nintendo's hand will probably be forced to move on to the next thing. They can make a whole new console, whether it's another handheld or not. They make a whole new thing with more current technology. They don't upgrade the Switch. They make the newer thing with the better technology that's more on par with what Sony and Microsoft are doing at that time, and with what developers are needing at that time in terms of power. And I feel like that's what they're going to end up doing. I don't think the Switch will have enough time to get itself upgraded, but I could be wrong. I'm not even totally against it. And there are the reasons, like I've talked about, that maybe Nintendo would consider doing it. They've done it in the past. The market trend has been there to do so. And the advantage is the power and the new capabilities and the different size or different shape of the Switch could afford us might be really interesting and exciting to gamers and to developers to make games on. So anything is possible, but that's how I think it all breaks down. That's my thoughts and perspective on the whole idea of an upgraded Switch. And of course, I want to hear from you. Do my theories and ideas make sense as far as why they wouldn't and as far as why they might? Or are you on the whole opposite end of the spectrum? Do you think it's a guaranteed thing they're going to do it? Or do you think, hell no, they will never do it? Whatever you feel, share your thoughts below. And that's it for me today, guys. Thanks so much, of course, as always, for tuning in. This is Rob of Rule of Two Review, and I will catch you next time on another video.